Thanks, Sam. Good evening, brothers and sisters and young people. Well, we come to the third in our four-part series on 2023 as a year of dramatic developments in fulfilling Bible prophecy. And as you can see from the title, tonight we want to talk about how Vladimir Putin, the master tactician, has prepared the world for Armageddon. The world is desperate to get rid of this man. Reports that Putin is dying of cancer, is already dead, regularly circulate on social media. I got a report from a brother just after sending an email out, and he said he had seen an internet article in which it was suggested that Putin was already dead and he'd been replaced by a double. I'm not sure you could find a double, but anyway, that's what this report said. But regardless of whether or not he's alive or dead, it doesn't really matter. We've learnt by history, brothers and sisters and young people, not to nominate who Gog might be. The important thing about Vladimir Putin is that he has established the system, the power, the vertical power of the old Tsarist regime. And that's what the scripture requires. It doesn't matter who that is. They say, of course, that there are worse than him waiting in the wings. So if he kicks the bucket, maybe someone even worse will arise. It doesn't matter. He has established the system of power, as you're going to see tonight, that accords with Ezekiel 38 and verse 2, which is why we've read that chapter. Putin is viewed as the most dangerous man on the planet, not surprisingly. Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022 was always on the cards after Putin's lengthy treatise in July 2021, and I'm going to give you snippets from that. And I want to demonstrate that what we're going to say tonight about things that are happening now is not new. This has been going on for a long, long time. He's always intended to take control of the Ukraine, and I'll demonstrate that to you. So what's happening is just basically fulfilling Bible prophecy. And it will not end with Ukraine, of course. We could ask the question, who's next? Well, this appeared recently. One of the henchmen of Putin apparently made a statement to the effect that Russia is going to invade Germany. And so this particular article, and there's a lot of fake news, by the way, on the internet, so you've got to be very careful and sort through it. But this was one of the things that appeared on the internet about Russia going to invade Germany, because a comment was made offhanded by a Russian fellow beside Putin. Well, we know, of course, that the scripture doesn't require Russia to invade Germany. But in our next study, God willing, we're going to have a look at Europe and Germany in particular and see what the scripture does require. It doesn't require a Russian invasion of Germany. Now, I want to just step you back in history a bit. Back in 2016, the Forbes magazine named Putin the world's most powerful person for the fourth year in a row. He probably had one or two since. He could, of course, legally rule Russia until 2036. And he has, as I said, created the vertical of power. In 2015, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty commented, Putin continues to prove he's one of the few men in the world powerful enough to do what he wants and to get away with it. And he is getting away with it. Now, this article, which again dates back to 2017, as you can see there on that slide, I think makes some very important points in relation to this man and what is happening in Russia. So I'm going to read it to you. Putin has created what he calls a vertical of power. Now, a vertical of power means, of course, that one man sits at the top. He doesn't have a cabinet. He doesn't refer to anybody to make it. He might seek advice, and you might have seen pictures of him seeking advice. He's at the end of a table about 10 metres, 15 metres long. So he keeps himself away from other people. He is the sole ruler of Russia. His word is law, and if you don't follow his word, you either are removed or you end up in a coffin in some way. They get rid of you. He goes on to say this, something unlike any we see in other great nations. The entire structure of Russian political power rests on one man. To understand Putin, you have to understand Russia. The last 100 years for that country have seen the fall of the monarchy, the collapse of democracy, the Great Depression, World War II with its tens of millions of Russians dead, Stalin's totalitarian brutalities, the collapse of communism, the breakup of the Soviet Union, and Boris Yeltsin's years of chaos and corruption. Then comes Vladimir Putin, who ushers in stability and, in popular perception, rising standards of living and increasing prominence and respect in the world. That respect is important. Russians have immense national pride. Russia is the largest country on the planet. Russia is also a rich country containing some of the largest deposits of raw materials, from oil and natural gas to nickel and aluminium. Culturally, it has often thought of itself as the Third Rome, and in fact is the Third Rome, preserving Christianity even as Rome and Byzantium fell to the barbarians. Putin understands Russia, but he also understands the world. He is not foolish enough to make a frontal assault on America or Europe. Instead, he knows how to use power asymmetrically with cyber tools and disinformation. He also understands the vulnerabilities of free societies, their internal divisions and discord, and their gaping openness. He understands the fragility of institutions like the European Union and ideas like integration and diversity. In other words, Vladimir Putin understands us very well. But all that begs an important question. Do we, or does Donald Trump, who was in power at the time, really understand him? Bible students understand him because this man, under the hand of God, has set up the required vertical of power, the old czarist system in Russia. And that's what Ezekiel 38 verse 2 requires, as we shall see in a minute. But just a few more words about the pride and the nationalism that is in Russia. This particular statue that you can see was constructed between May 1959 and October 1967, so it took a while to build, in Volgograd, Russia, to commemorate the heroes of the Battle of Stalingrad. It was the tallest sculpture in the world at the time, 85 metres or 279 feet. It is the tallest statue in Europe. And of course, the inscription at the base of that statue is, "Homeland Mother is calling." And Putin knows how. He knows how to pull on those emotional strings in the Russian nation. Now, I'm really going to take you back in history here. I'm going to go back to the British historian Sir Archibald Allison, who lived between 1792, sounds like ancient history, doesn't it, through to 1867. This is what he said about Russia. The prevailing passion of the Russian nation is the love of conquest. And this ardent desire is the unseen spring which impels their accumulated force in ceaseless advance over all the adjoining states. Domestic grievances, how great soever, are overlooked in the thirst for foreign aggrandisement. In the conquest of the world, the people hope to find a compensation, and more than a compensation, for all the evils of their interior administration. Think carefully about that, because it plays a part in what we're seeing today in relation to the Ukraine. Every Russian is inspired with the conviction that his country is one day to conquer the world. And the universal belief of this result is one of the chief causes of the rapid strides which Russia of late years has made towards its realisation. The meanest peasant in Russia is impressed with the belief that his country is destined to subdue the world. As I put there at the base of that slide, it is wise to understand the Russian psyche, not like ours. It's not like the Americans. Very, very different. And that's why we can see what's happening in Russia now is very much in the direction that the Bible requires. And that's why we're so happy about it. You know, even Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto, said this: the policy of Russia is changeless. Its methods, its tactics, its manoeuvres may change, but the polar star of its policy, world domination, is a fixed star. And that's so true. Now again, I'm going to drag you back into a bit of history, because it's all important to lay the foundations for what we're going to say a little later on. I'm going to take you back to 1997. Now this was a report by an Australian news organisation, news.com Australia, and it goes back a little way to March the 4th, 2017. Under the heading, the 1990s manifesto outlining Russia's plans are starting to come true, they wrote, in 1997, a Russian political scientist named Alexander Dugin, I'm just going to pause there for a second because Alexander Dugin is one of the men, if you see from this article, one of the men behind Vladimir Putin. His daughter was assassinated a year or two ago, presumably by Ukrainians. We don't know who it was. He's got vengeance in his heart, this man. He wrote this document. He's there behind Putin today. And a serving Russian general named Nikolai Klokotov sat down and wrote a text that would become the foundation of Russian geopolitical strategy over the next 20 years. It was called Foundations of Geopolitics. And if you walk into a shop, a bookshop, and saw that on the shelf, you probably wouldn't bother to buy it. But it would have been wise if you were involved in the leadership of other nations to buy it. Because, as it goes on to say, it was all about how Russia could reassert itself in the world. Chillingly, the book now reads like a to-do list for Putin's behaviour on the world stage. The book starts out by saying that the shrewd thing for Russia to do is to steer clear of direct military confrontation. Instead, the book counsels Russian leaders to favour political stealth. It emphasises the need for the infiltration of Western institutions and the use of soft power, like through the internet, to shape the world in Russia's favour. The book argues that Ukraine should, surprise, and this is 1997 by the way, be annexed by Russia. Goes back a long way, doesn't it? I mean, Putin didn't even become president until 2000, but this was in writing in 1997. It's become a to-do list for him. The book's authors say Russia should encourage Britain to leave the European Union and thus weaken it. That's right, Russian strategists were openly arguing in favour of Brexit in 1997. It didn't happen until 2016. When, it says, it was just a glimmer in Nigel Farage's eyes. No one knows who Nigel Farage is anymore, but he was one of the very strong advocates for Britain leaving the European Union. More from this book. It identifies Iran as a key ally for Russia and recommends that Turkey should receive a series of geopolitics shocks, using Kurds and Armenians to keep it off balance. Yeah, well, that's happened too. The book states that the maximum task of the future is the Finlandisation of all of Europe. Now, that word doesn't mean a lot to many. Finlandisation is defined as the process by which one powerful country makes a smaller neighbouring country abide by the former's foreign policy rules while allowing it to keep its nominal independence and its own political system. That's exactly what's going to happen to Germany and the Eastern European nations who gained their freedom from Russia. They'll go back under its control in due time. They won't need to invade. There'll be other factors that bring them under the skirt of Mother Russia. And we'll talk more about that in due time. So let's then come and have a look at what we've just read in Ezekiel 38. Now, we're very familiar with this chapter, but its first two I want to focus on for a second. Here are the two literal translations that we normally put up because the authorised translation, though adequate, is not as accurate as it might be. Rotherham's translation is very similar to the Amplified Bible translation. Son of man, set thy face against Gog of, my King James Version says, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog. This adds the word of. It's telling you about the origin of this Gog character. And this is character. So Gog is of the land of Magog, Prince of Rosh, the King James says, the chief prince, and we know that there is a proper name there, Rosh, which is the most ancient form of the name Russia, Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal, and prophesy concerning him. So what about this Gog character? Well, Unger, in his Bible dictionary, says this. Ezekiel 38 and 39, which deal with Gog, the prince. Yeah, so he's a powerful prince. And Magog is land, so he's got that right. So Gog is of the land of Magog. Describes the actual invasion of Palestine, Israel as it's now called, by a great northern confederacy ostensibly headed up by Russia. He's got that right. He's used that name, Rosh, correctly. The scene depicts a gigantic outburst of anti-Semitism and a colossal attempt to overrun Palestine or Israel and annihilate the Jew. And if you have a look at this word go, places like the English and Hebrew Bible Students' Concordance will tell you it means a roof, or the one at the top. It's like an umbrella power that sits above others. So here is a dictator. So Unger is quite right in what he says. But there are religious underpinnings to the invasion of the land of Israel, as described in Ezekiel 38 and 39, as there were to the invasion of Ukraine. The Russian Orthodox Church played a major role, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And most of you probably sort of recoil in horror when you see images like this on the screen where Putin is kowtowing to the Pope, kissing the image, the icon of the Madonna of Vladimir in front of the Pope, and so on. I mean, he's probably the most evil man on the planet, most irreligious man on the planet, yet he is religious in his own eyes. You know, he still wears, apparently, because he had a devout Christian mother, a Russian Orthodox mother, who secretly baptised him at birth. Of course, they sprinkle babies at birth. He still wears his baptismal cross. Now, this man has forged a very close relationship with the Russian Orthodox Church. And down in that bottom right-hand corner, you've got a picture of Kirill, the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, who, when he came to power in 2004, said he was going to make the Russian Orthodox Church a Putin church. And he succeeded, right? It is a Putin church. Even when Putin invaded the Ukraine, and there were quite a lot of Russian Orthodox priests who objected to it, they were crushed. It has become a Putin church. And of course, he uses that platform to whip the West with religion. I mean, it's astonishing, isn't it? It is ironical that this man could do this, but he does. This is historical. This is 10 years ago. In his State of the Nation speech in the Kremlin in December 2013, he said, amongst other things, today many nations are revising their moral values and ethical norms, eroding ethnic traditions and differences between peoples and cultures. Society is now required to accept without question the equality of good and evil. I mean, the Bible says that would happen in the latter days, doesn't it? They would call good evil and evil good, Isaiah chapter 5, and it's happening. But he points it out. We are to accept, he says, without question the equality of good and evil, strange as it seems, concepts that are opposite in meaning. Many Euro-Atlantic countries have moved away from their roots, including Christian values. Policies are being pursued that place on the same level a multi-child family and a same-sex partnership, a faith in God and a belief in Satan. This is the path to degradation, he says. I mean, how would you be if you were in the Western world and you heard that? Well, it's exactly what the Western world's doing. And he's pointing out that it's not biblical. It's not traditional. It's against what the church once stood for. And, of course, he's right. So what about Putin in Ukraine? This is another historic article from the 16th of April 2016. President Vladimir Putin reiterated that nothing can shake Russia's perpetual blood alliance with Ukraine. In spite of all malicious efforts exerted by the ruling junta in Kiev, adding, "We, the people of the Russian Federation and descendants of the Soviet Union, we are determined to stop this plague." What's he talking about? What plague? Now, the Rus established their nation in AD 862 in Ukraine, which we'll see in a minute. First established Kiev as its capital in the land of the Rus, as it was called, Rus coming from Rosh. Ukraine is the heartland of the Russian Empire, and Putin is determined to control it again. So here's a map. You're all familiar, I think, with this map. You can see right smack in the middle there above the Black Sea. You've got Magog off to the west. You've got Meshech and Tubal off to the east or northeast, and so on. I mean, we're quite familiar with this map of Ezekiel 38. But I want to point out that Magog, and this is where you see that red border, that's where historians say the original Magog was. The two largest nations in that area are Ukraine and Belarus. Now, we tend in our community to think Magog, think Germany. True? Well, Germany, over on the west, is part of Magog, and they'll play their part in due time. Ezekiel 39 has a role for them. But when we read this statement, that Gog is of the land of Magog, prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, we are being told that they're going to take possession of the Ukraine and Belarus before Armageddon. That's what we're being told. And that, of course, is obviously Putin's aim. Now, the current invasion by Russia of Ukraine is due to a number of factors. But one of them was the fact that Ukraine wants to join the European Union. And today, right today, they're pressing for that to happen. But it won't happen, because there are nations in the European Union who will not allow that to happen. Also, Ukraine was the original homeland of the Kingdom of the Rus, and Kiev, of course, was its first capital, and Putin wants to re-establish the old Russian Empire. Because, like most people, he has a hero. And his hero is Vladimir I, the great Rus emperor whose power came to its peak in 1015 AD. And that map you can see there with the yellow is Kievan Rus. And you'll see that it includes Ukraine and Belarus and portion of modern-day Russia. And the historical capital of the Kingdom of the Rus was Kiev. And that's the city that Putin wants back. He's always regarded Ukraine as part of Russia, and he described the fall of the USSR as the greatest geopolitical disaster in history. And he's going to write it. Ukraine is integral to Russia. As I said, the Rus first established Kiev as the capital of the land in AD 879. In 2004, Ukraine elected a democratic, European-inclined president. He was poisoned prior to the election. He survived and he won the election. He didn't last too long. Putin's ally, Yanukovych, was defeated and Putin was humiliated. And if you ever see the picture or the video of Putin in the Ukraine after that election, when he forced the newly elected president to put Yanukovych into the prime ministership, you will know that he was very, very angry with what the Ukrainians had done. So what did he do? He retaliated in January 2006 in one of the worst winters that they had experienced in a long time by cutting off gas. By gas, I mean that which you use to heat your home. Cutting off gas to the Ukraine. Putin watched with growing anger as Ukraine liberalised with gay pride marches. And the Orthodox Church, the Ukrainian arm of the Orthodox Church, cut itself off from the Moscow Patriarchy, no longer controlled from Moscow. That angered him as well. And one of the reasons for the invasion of Ukraine was that the Russian Orthodox Church said, one, we want to get control back of the Ukrainian Russian Orthodox Church, and two, we demand that the gay pride marches be stopped. Two big reasons behind the invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. And everybody knew it was coming if you just had your eyes open. This is an article, just a few snippets from an article by Vladimir Putin on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. It was a lengthy article written on the 12th of July, at least published on the 12th of July 2021. And this is what he said. During the recent direct line, when I was asked about Russian-Ukrainian relations, I said that Russians and Ukrainians were one people, a single whole. These words were not driven by some short-term considerations or prompted by the current political context. It is what I have said on numerous occasions and what I firmly believe. I would suggest, if I can just break in there, that if Vladimir Putin firmly believes something, then you better believe that he's going to do something about it. I therefore feel it necessary to explain my position in detail and share my assessments of today's situation. Russians, Ukrainians and Belarusians, so watch out Belarus, because they're in the firing line too, are all descendants of ancient Rus. And he's right, he's historically correct, which was the largest state in Europe. Slavic and other tribes across the vast territory from Ladoga, Novgorod, Sok to Kiev and Chernigov were bound together by one language, which we now refer to as Old Russian. Economic ties, the rule of the princes of the Rurik dynasty, and after the baptism of Rus, the Orthodox faith. The spiritual choice made by St. Vladimir, who was both Prince of Novgorod and Grand Prince of Kiev, still largely determines our affinity today. The throne of Kiev held a dominant position in ancient Rus. This had been the custom since the late 9th century. The tale of bygone years captured for posterity the words of Oleg the prophet about Kiev. Let it be the mother of all Russian cities. I am confident that true sovereignty of Ukraine is possible only in partnership with Russia. Our spiritual, human and civilizational ties formed for centuries and have their origins in the same sources. They have been hardened by common trials, achievements and victories. Our kinship has been transmitted from generation to generation. It is in the hearts and the memory of people living in modern Russia and Ukraine, in the blood ties that unite millions of our families. Together, we have always been and will be many times stronger and more successful, for we are one people. Now, if you're reading that in Ukrainian, what will you reckon? I think you'd say, well, yeah, okay, probably not worth fighting. But you see, they want to fight for their democracy, and Putin's determined to take it off them. And the Ukrainian fight against Russia is starting to splutter. They don't have the means to stop the Russians. I mean, they've done pretty well, but they don't have the means to do it for year after year after year. The day will come. And I believe that the Great Depression is coming will finish it off. The day will come when Russia will simply walk all over the top of it. And Putin will have his objective. And the Bible will be fulfilled. And that's why I've quoted to you so much stuff. Because that's telling us that the Bible is being fulfilled. We can have absolute confidence that the rest of it will be fulfilled. The rat, yeah, that's what he's known as, the rat, is playing the long game. Vladimir Putin once recounted the great lesson he learned as a teenager with a rat. The world needs to take notice of that lesson. He will hit out if cornered with no other way of escape. Bible prophecy requires many European nations to be part of the Russian Confederacy at the time of Armageddon. Ukraine fatigue is already setting in around Europe. Coming depression, as I said, will end support for Ukraine and its democracy. Now, we've had illustrations of this, the failure of COP27 last year. They've got COP28 coming up. That'll be a failure too because nationalism is coming into the picture. And nations are saying, well, we're not going to do that because we're going to go down the gurgler if we do that. So there's going to be some sort of roadblocks put in front of the things that the world wants to achieve. Now, this was a picture that was in the press about Vladimir Putin, the rat. And here's the story. This goes back only to 2nd of August this year, so it's not that old. Once, when he and his friends were chasing rats with sticks in a dilapidated apartment building in St. Petersburg, where he grew up, a huge rat, and quoting the words of Putin himself in an interview, a huge rat he'd cornered suddenly lashed around and threw itself at him, chasing the surprised and frightened Putin to his door before he slammed it shut in the rodent's face. For Putin, it's a parable. It's the green on the screen. I got a quick and lasting lesson in the meaning of the word cornered. Yeah, watch out for the rat. If you corner him, he will do to others, to other nations, what the rat did to him. He would jump in their face. So it's a good warning, I think. Now, that's all I'm going to say about Putin in relation to Ukraine and Europe. And there's a lot more that could be said in our next study, I believe. We'll have a look at Europe in particular. What I want to do now is to branch off to the east. I want to go to the nations to the east of Israel. I want you to come to Daniel chapter 7. Now, we're familiar, of course, with Daniel 7. It's the chapter that deals with the four beasts that line up with the events, as we shall see in our next study. We're going to just focus on the fourth beast here, which we know, of course, is the symbol of Rome. Daniel 7 verse 7 says this: "After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast." It's not described like the others. We had a lion and a bear and so on. You don't get a description like that. You just get this indescribable fourth beast, because it was much more terrible in many ways than those empires that preceded it. Dreadful and terrible, it says, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. We know that iron is the symbol for the empire of Rome. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. Now, those words that I've just read that are in green on the screen are the ones we want to focus on. It says it stamped the residue with the feet of it. Now, that, in fact, has not yet happened. It's not historical. It has not happened. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And we're going to focus a lot on the 10 horns in our next study, God willing, in a week's time. Just note this: if you haven't got this little note in your Bible to connect what you read in verse 7 with what you read in verse 19, then I would suggest that you might make that link. Because in verse 19, we are told that this fourth beast had nails or claws of brass. That's a little note down the bottom of the slide there. It had brazen claws. So why is that important? Well, iron, of course, represents Rome. And it's got iron teeth. What do you do with teeth? I know what I do with my teeth. I consume things with them. But how do you catch, if you're a beast, how do you catch what you're going to consume? Well, you've got to catch it with your claws, don't you? That's what lions do, or other beasts do. They catch it with their claws, and then they consume it with their teeth. What that tells me is that the capture involved in this beast word comes from its Greek origins, because it's going to end up in Constantinople, which of course is Greek. The Russian Orthodox Church is simply a carbon copy of the Greek Orthodox Church. And when in 1453 the Turks pushed they pushed the Eastern Roman Empire out of that place, the Greek Church went to Moscow, became the Third Rome, they said. That's where its origins are. So it's very important to have this link between the iron and the brass. More about that later on in our studies. Now, what's this verse really telling us, do you think? Well, as I said, the words in green and stamp the residue with the feet of it have not yet occurred. I want to just take you through some maps of the four world empires. Here's the Assyro-Babylonian Empire, overthrown by Cyrus in 539 BC. The brownie colour on that map is where the kingdom of Babylon was situated. It was Nimrod's kingdom, revived, of course. It was followed by the Medo-Persian Empire, which was huge by comparison, and followed in by the Grecian Empire, which was a very similar size. But importantly, both the Persian and the Grecian Empire's eastern boundary was the Indus River. It was in India at the time. It's in Pakistan today. That was the eastern boundary. Now, when the Roman Empire came along in 67 BC through to 476, it was mainly in the west, all through Europe, right down through North Africa, but mainly in the west. And in 118 AD, Hadrian, the emperor, actually did something very important. He gave up Trajan's conquests over the east, to the Persian Gulf, and he built a line of forts up through Syria and Jordan of today. You can go there and stand in those forts. And that became the eastern boundary of the Roman Empire for the rest of its history. So what does it mean here when it says that had great iron teeth, that devoured and breaking feet, and stamped the residue with the feet of it? Well, it has to have something to do with what had preceded it. The Persians came along, and like a bear, 3 ribs in its mouth, it consumed all of the Babylonian Empire territory. Along came the Grecians under Alexander, and they consumed all the territory of the Persians. Along came the Romans, and they didn't. There was a residue that they didn't conquer. So where's that residue, do you think? Well, here it is. Here's the residue of the 3 empires. It goes from what we would call Syria today, but that's where the boundary of the Roman Empire was for most of its history, right across to the Indus River. It includes nations like Iraq, portion of Syria, of course, Iran, Afghanistan, and half of Pakistan. Watch out. Because this prophecy is telling us that the 4th beast, revived, is going to conquer that territory. They will become part of its confederacy. That's why Persia is mentioned in Ezekiel 38, 5 and 6. It's not Iran. It includes Iran. But if you have a look at a map of Persia, while the Babylonian Empire was in existence, you will see it was actually much bigger than the Babylonian. It went right across to the Indus. So when we read about Persia in the latter days, we're not talking about Iran. We're talking about the region from Syria right across to Pakistan. That's the residue being referred to. And when Russia takes that territory, they will have conquered what was known in history as the Seleucid Kingdom. And the Bible calls the Seleucid Kingdom, Seleucus was one of Alexander's generals who took control of that region. It describes the Seleucid Kingdom as the king of the north. Daniel 11, verse 40. And you can't be the king of the north, biblically speaking, unless you control that territory from Syria to the Indus River in Pakistan. Okay, got a picture? And when Russia has conquered that territory, they can then take Constantinople, who is the hymn, by the way, of Daniel chapter 11 and verse 40. The king of the north shall come against him, and the context tells you who the him is. It's the power controlling Constantinople. All right? And what we know is that Russia will ultimately conquer Constantinople and become the place of the eastern leg of Nebuchadnezzar's image. And when they do that, then they can make their invasion from the north, as Ezekiel 38 and Daniel 11 describes, down into the land of Israel, into Egypt. But not until they become the king of the north. Very important to know that there are stages, that there are certain points that have to be achieved before things can unfold. Okay, so am I just telling you something new? No, I'm not. This is from Brother Maurice Stewart's The Prophecy of Daniel study notes. Now, some of you might have in your library an Australian version of this set of study notes, and you will look in vain for this quotation. Because when it was republished in Australia, the publishers, for whatever reason, we didn't agree with it, left it out. But I happen to have an American version. And this is what it says about Daniel 7 verse 7, stamping the residue with the feet of it. Let us emphasise, he says, here is an important statement that has not yet, as yet, been fulfilled. Rome, the 4th beast, has never trampled the residue of Persia underfoot. It has never occupied all this territory. A power must yet arise which will occupy the territories of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, to be afterwards subjected to a higher power, namely Jesus Christ. And then he says, Russia will do this. Thus, like the image of Daniel chapter 2, whose metals will have to be confederated together before they can be broken to pieces together, and we'll do more of that in our next study, God willing, so also this terrible 4th beast vision has a latter day application. He's dead right. And you know what? If you go and have a look at what's happened in the last 10 years or so, you know and understand that Russia has got a strong foothold. In Syria, for example, they control a good proportion of the oil in Iran. They have a port in the Persian Gulf. They have 2 airports close by. They are close allies now of Persia, or Russia, of Iran, I should say. And Iran is supplying them with drones and other things. We know that they're dabbling in Pakistan. We know that Putin threatened about 3 or 4 years ago that if the Taliban took over Afghanistan, that the Russians would go back in, but they haven't been able to because of other priorities. We know all of that, and we know that the day will come when they will go in and take that entire territory from Syria right across to the Indus River and become the king of the north. Then they can fulfill the prophecy, take Constantinople, and use that as the base of their invasion of the Middle East, down through Israel and into Egypt. Putin's global ambitions. Now, this is an article from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and they're a bit worried. It goes back to 2019. This is what they said. Success begets more success. And since Putin's return to the presidency in 2012, his record has been enhanced by what Russian officialdom sees as several important wins. The annexation of Crimea, 2014. The war in eastern Ukraine from 2014 onwards. The military deployment in Syria, 2015. The tense military standoff with the West in the Baltic and Black Seas. And the interference in the US and European domestic politics, 2016, have all enhanced Russia's image as a major power. Moreover, the Kremlin's record since 2012 suggests that it will not be deterred or constrained by economic difficulties. Now, the reason I want to read this out is because this is exactly what that gentleman from the 18th century said. Remember him, the British historian? This is exactly what he said. It will not be deterred or constrained by economic difficulties. I mean, Stalin didn't care about his people, did he? He killed 40-odd million of them by starvation. He didn't care about his people. Do you reckon Putin cares about them? No, he didn't care about them. And many of the Russian people will put up with a lot of that stuff because they're Russians. The Russian economy has performed poorly since then, with growth hampered by a failure to institute long overdue structural reforms and excessive dependence on exporting hydrocarbons and other raw materials. But economic difficulties have not put a brake on Russian activism abroad. To the contrary, the Kremlin's ability to withstand both domestic economic difficulties and Western sanctions without changing course is a sign of Moscow's commitment to an activist foreign policy as a long-term choice of the country's leadership. Well, that's telling me it won't matter what happens internally in Russia. You know, it won't matter if many of the Russians starve to death. It won't matter if 300,000 or 400,000 are killed in Ukraine. None of that's going to matter. What will happen is what the Bible says will happen. Putin or Russia will take control of the Ukraine, and we will have a system, if not a man, I think he's probably the man, but we'll have a system that can be described as Gog of the land of Magog. This is what Brother Thomas wrote on page 20 in the preface of Elpis Israel. You know, if he could hear these words being read out from the grave, you would hear a big whoop yell, wouldn't you? He can't. But you and I are here to read his words. When Russia makes its grand move for the building up of its image empire, then let the reader know that the end of all things, as at present constituted, is at hand. The long-expected but stealthy advent of the King of Israel will be on the eve of becoming a fact. And salvation will be to those who not only look for it, but have trimmed their lamps by believing the gospel of the kingdom unto the obedience of faith and the perfection thereof in fruits meet for repentance. Some pretty good exhortation in that. So God willing, brothers and sisters and young people, our next study next week, we'll have a look at the fourth part in this series. We're going to have a look at the reshaping of Europe required by Bible promise.